Just a quick overview of Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1 was really about the training of Daniel and his three friends, where after they were taken to Babylon in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar wanted some young slaves from Judah who were intelligent, impressionable, could be taught the Babylonian system to serve him in his palace. And they had to be from the royal family, had to have good background, and they had to be young so that they could teach them the Babylonian system. So he selected some people. Daniel and his friends were among them. I'm quite sure there were many others, but Daniel and his three friends were the only ones that were mentioned here because they were the focus to be trained, and told his eunuch or his government official to prepare them for 3 years that they should eat from the king's table so that they would be properly nourished to work in the palace. But Daniel and his friends decided they were not going to eat the king's food because they didn't want to defile themselves. So they asked for permission to be exempt. So the commander that was over them, he didn't do it. So, but there was another guy that was assigned to the four of them. And Daniel asked to be tested for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, if he liked what he see, then he should allow them to continue to eat what is called pulse meat. Pulse meat is really vegetable because they didn't want to eat the Babylonian meat, wine, and all of that stuff, because all of that stuff was first offered to gods before they eat it. That's the Babylonian practice. So the servant decided to allow them to be tested for 10 days. And after 10 days, they found out that Daniel's skin and countenance and everything was much better than all the other people who were eating the king's food. So he decided to let them eat pulse meat for the 3 years. And while they were doing that, Daniel and his friend, they prayed a lot. They asked God for his protection, his guidance upon their lives so that they may be an influence and have an impact in the palace while they were there. And God heard their prayer. As a matter of fact, Daniel and his friend, they were really chosen by God for this. So the Lord blessed them with gifts. He blessed Daniel with the gift of interpretation of dreams, which is really the operation of the spirit of wisdom and revelation. So he blessed Daniel with that. And, at the end of 3 years, all of them were given an oral examination. And King Nebuchadnezzar found Daniel and his four friends to be 10 times better than all of his magicians, astrologers, conjurers, and sorcerers. So as I was reading that, I realized that one of the things that the Lord did with this, he made them 10 times better because they asked for 10 days of testing. They were much better above them. And because of that, Nebuchadnezzar elevated them in the kingdom. That was their first elevation, by the way. But the second one is coming for Daniel. Because in Daniel chapter 2, we're going to see where Nebuchadnezzar has this dream. God gave him this dream and he needed an interpreter. And Daniel was the only one that could do it. And that's going to elevate Daniel even higher because God had chosen him for this purpose, for him to be in the king's palace, working close to the king for the 70 years while his people was in captivity. So this right here is really, really interesting because we're going to see that Nebuchadnezzar was a Babylonian king. God chose him to give him the dream about all the kingdoms of the world from that point onwards to the end of the world, really, as we will see as we go through the book of Daniel. And he chose the prophet Daniel to interpret it. So Daniel was elevated, really elevated amongst all the kings that came in the Babylonian kingdom. Daniel was known. God did that. So God can elevate us like that for his purpose if we're faithful. So let's go over to the chapter. We actually learned this in 2020 when the Lord decided to teach us this book. We had just finished Revelation, book of Revelation. And that's another thing I want to point out. These books are twin books. They're twin. The book of Revelation unveils the mysteries of the Lord Jesus Christ about the things that are going to happen in the world, up to the coming of the Lord, up to the judgment upon the earth. And then the book of Daniel interprets a lot of the mysteries in the book of Revelation. And it also teaches us how to conduct ourselves when these things begin to happen. Because Daniel and his friends, they faced a similar thing. What they went through in Babylon is similar to what we're going to face in the world in the days to come. I say days to come, years to come, because we're close to the coming of the Lord. I don't know how many people believe that, but we are. I can't put a timeline. The only thing I can say is the Lord said to start preaching this stuff, preach the gospel of the kingdom. We are expecting a 7-year period to come, which will be the fulfillment of the last week of the 70-week prophecy, which I talked about a lot. And I'm going to talk about that all the time because that's very important for us to understand. So when we studied this book, the Lord said it's time to unseal the book. No more hidden. We need to reveal what's written in the book, what's going on. So he decided to teach us. So this book is unsealed now, along with the revelation of the Lord Jesus Christ, the unveiling of Jesus. These two books go together. So Daniel 2, which is what we're going to go through, and Daniel 5, it gives instruction for leaders, how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. And Daniel 1, Daniel 3, and Daniel 6 give instruction to believers on how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. You know, as you see, we will see that Daniel, they faced death and they stood. Daniel faced the lions. The 3 Hebrew boys were thrown in the fire furnace. And this dream that Nebuchadnezzar had is going to be an image that Nebuchadnezzar literally built and called the whole world to worship, because Babylon was the most powerful kingdom in the world at that time. So he was not only the leader of Babylon, but he was literally the leader of the world. So when he built the image, he called everybody to worship it. We're going to see that pretty soon. And anyone who didn't come and worship this image would be thrown in the fire. There is going to be a repetition of this. But will not necessarily be a fiery furnace, but it will be something similar. You will be killed because the image is going to be built again. This is why we need to understand this book now, because everything that happens here is going to repeat itself. So one of the first things we need to understand about this book of Daniel is that it's a historical book. Historical because it is about the dream of Nebuchadnezzar and how Daniel gave the interpretation, and it is about the future, which also makes it prophetic. And over a period of about 50 years after Nebuchadnezzar saw the dream, it began to come to pass. And by the end of the book, 25% of it came to pass, which means that 25% of the book is historical. The other 75% is prophetic. It's for the future. So we need to understand this book here is prophetic and it's historical. So not only does it tell us about history, which is in the past, it also tells us and points toward the future. So this book is a very, very interesting book. Study along with others. Books like Joel, Isaiah, Jeremiah. My God, they tell us everything that's going to happen. All right, let's go to the first verse. And in the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams wherewith his spirit was troubled and his sleep brake from him. I want you to notice here, it says he dreamed dreams. That means it's more than one dream. And it was during the 2nd year of his reign. Now, it says here that it is the 2nd year of his reign. What it means by that is that it's the 2nd year of his reign by himself, because initially he was ruling with his father. He was like a co-ruler with his father. So now he was ruling by himself solely. And at this time, when this occurred, Daniel and his friends had already graduated from their training and were working in the palace. So it's more than one dream that Nebuchadnezzar had. but also it was only one dream. I don't know if you understand what I mean by that. He said he dreamed dreams. But as we go along, we're going to see in verse 24 and 26 that Daniel only interpreted one dream. So what this means is that he was dreaming the same thing over and over and over and over every night. It's the same dream that he was getting over and over. God wanted to communicate something very, very important to Nebuchadnezzar. And so he kept giving him the same dream. So Nebuchadnezzar's spirit was troubled, as you can see in the first verse. His spirit was troubled, the dream wouldn't go away, and he could not sleep. He needed an interpretation. God did it like that, made him agitated. So when he saw it, he was troubled. His spirit was troubled. And he just needed an interpretation. But the main thing, he forgot the dream. Even though he kept dreaming the same thing over and over and over again, he couldn't remember the dream. So he was restless. The Lord did that. So let's go to the second verse and the third verse. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to show the king his dream. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. See what he said? I have dreamed a dream, meaning one dream. Same dream, over and over and over again. So he called his magicians, his conjurers, his sorcerers, and his Chaldeans. These are four classifications of wise men in the Babylonian kingdom. Let's see what they are, because I'm learning about this myself. Babylonians believed dreams were messages from God. Occultism did not just start the other day. And I just found out disturbingly this week that there are ministers in the church that are using this kind of stuff in the church to attract a lot of crowds, to get miracles to be performed in the church. I just learned this week. Somebody gave a testimony about themselves being a minister who was involved in this, who actually went to the occult to get powers to do this kind of stuff, because he was ministering for a long time and his ministry was not growing. And he saw other ministers who had their ministries were growing, and he wondered about it. And then he met a prophet, so-called prophet, that was making a lot of money and was attracting a lot of people in his ministry. And he wanted to know how. And the guy took him to these occultists to go through rituals to get power. So that was very disturbing for me to know that this stuff is going on in the church today. So here we have the magicians. What do? Magician is a Hebrew word that comes from the root word meaning stylus or pen, and they're more like scholars. So they are the learned ones in the occult. They're the teachers, scholars. The conjurers are astrologers or enchanters, communicators with the dead, necromancy. When they want answers, they call up these spirits pretending to be dead people, and they get their answers and they tell a whole bunch of lies. Sorcerers, those who practice sorcery, they cast spells, incantation, witchcraft comes under that. You have a lot of that going on now around here. Chaldeans, these are the priests. The astrologers have occultic knowledge of the East. So there's four categories that work together in the occult under Satan's power and in his kingdom. Their role was to advise the king. So these are the men that were the advisors in the king's kingdom, and he went to them. So let's see what happened in verse 4. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac. O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show you the interpretation. So that word Syriac is Aramic. The language of the Babylonians at the time was Aramic. And as a matter of fact, chapters 2, verse 4 to chapter 7, verse 8 were written in Aramic because it was matters relating to the Gentile powers. Chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 4, and chapter 8 verse 1 to chapter 12, verse 13, it was written in Hebrew because it was matters relating to Israel. So whenever the content of this book was pertaining to the Gentile powers, when I say Gentile power, I'm talking about the Babylonian kingdom, um, it was written in Aramaic. So Aramaic was a common language among the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Persians, and it was used in diplomacy, commerce, and trade, and it was the lingua franca of the region. So when they came, they said, "Oh, king, live forever." This was the way to greet the king in those days. We see in 1 Kings 1:31 that Bathsheba did the same thing with David. Nehemiah did the same thing. Daniel addressed the king as such. Daniel 3:9, Daniel 5:10, and Daniel 6:21. And it was one of the ways to maintain a level of integrity. This was what the wise men tell Nebuchadnezzar. Tell thy servant the dream and we will declare the interpretation. See, they were very confident. Tell us the dream and we will give you the interpretation. See, they didn't want to do it alone. They wanted to do it together so they could lie together. They believed that their combined efforts would yield a satisfactory answer to the king. If you stand alone, you fall. In the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Let's see what Nebuchadnezzar said in verse 5. The king answered and said to the Chaldean, the thing is gone from me. If you will not make known unto me the dream, with the interpretation thereof, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. But if you show the dream and the interpretation thereof, you shall receive me gifts and rewards of great honor. Therefore, show me the dream and the interpretation thereof. This is the typical behavior of a king. They're impulsive, domineering, demanding, authoritarian, proud, arrogant, and so on and so forth. They either threaten with extreme penalties or lavish, generous gifts. They have a personality swing that swings like a pendulum. Nebuchadnezzar was no different. Is his reasoning for the Chaldeans to tell his dream reasonable? His assumption was that if they could reveal the dream correctly, then their interpretation would be accurate, authentic, and without deception. Did Nebuchadnezzar really forget the dream? Some scholars don't think so. The word "from me is firm" could be translated as "the thing is gone from me." To prove that Nebuchadnezzar really forgot the dream, he genuinely forgot the first dream. This dream is the first dream because he had another dream later on, but he didn't forget the second dream. So if Nebuchadnezzar was troubled by the dream, he clearly remembered. And that's when he decided to call the magicians, the astrologers, and Chaldeans, the soothsayers, for interpretation to recall the dream. The absolute reason why Nebuchadnezzar was made to forget the dream was, one, for Nebuchadnezzar to know the folly and helplessness of the Babylonian gods and goddesses to help. Number two, to lift Daniel to prominence and to be positioned strategically. Why was Daniel placed there? For a strategic reason. God placed Daniel there for his reason. Because through Daniel, God would reveal important end time revelations concerning the region and for him to influence subsequent kings, all the way up to Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus. This was God's way of elevating Daniel.